Todas e todos. É com grande alegria que damos início ao
Good morning,
webinar de
everyone.
lançamento
It's with
da
a great
iniciativa
pleasure that we
ThinkFood and
begin the
Climate.
Think
Meu
Food
nome é
and
Nadine
Climate
Marques, eu
Initiative
sou
launch
pesquisadora da
webinar.
Cátedra Josué de
My name
Castro
is
do
Nadine
Sul, tenho meus
Marques.
áreas
I'm a
trabalhistas
researcher at the
aposentados
Josué de
e vou
Castro
moderar
Chair,
esse evento.
and I'll
Em
be the
nome de toda a nossa
moderator of this
equipe, eu
event.
agradeço
On
imensamente
behalf
pela
of our
presença de
entire
cada
team,
pessoa que está nos
I'd like to
acompanhando nesse
thank
momento.
each and every
E
one
antes de
of you for your
começarmos, eu gostaria de
presence.
passar algumas informações
Before we
importantes
start,
sobre a
I'd
nossa
like to share
programação.
some important information
Iniciaremos
about
com uma
our
breve
schedule.
apresentação da Isabel
We'll
Garcia
start with a
Drigo sobre a
brief
iniciativa
presentation
ThinkFood and Climate, para que ela explique como
by
funciona essa
Isabel
parceria
Garcia
entre
Drigo about the
Imaflora,
Think Food
a
and Climate
Cátedra Josué de
Initiative,
Castro, Cebrap
so
e
that she can explain
Sustentabilidade.
how this
E também
partnership
como
between
será a
Imaflora,
atuação da
Cátedra,
iniciativa
Josué de
desde esse
Castro, and Cebrap
momento até a
Sustentabilidade
COP30 no
works,
Brasil
and
em
how the initiative will
2025.
work
Em seguida,
from
nós
now on
teremos a
until the
participação
COP30 in
especial de
Brazil.
Patrick Caron, Adilson
Next, we'll have the
Favaretto,
special
Marcelo Brito e
participation
Ricardo
of
Abramovay,
Patrick
que vão
Caron,
compartilhar os
Adilson Favaretto,
conhecimentos,
Marcelo
experiências e
Brito, and Ricardo
reflexões em um debate que
Abramovay,
tem como
who
base a
share their
urgência
experience
da
and knowledge in
transformação
a
dos
debate
sistemas
that is based on
agroalimentares
the
para
urgency of the
responder à
transition
crise
of
climática
sustainable
e
agri-food
social que o
systems
planeta e a
to
humanidade
respond to the
enfrentam
climate and
atualmente.
social
Eu
crisis that
gostaria
the
de lembrar
planet
que perguntas
faces.
podem ser enviadas via
Remember
chat
that
a qualquer
questions can be
momento.
sent
E
in
no final de todas as
through the
apresentações,
chat
elas serão
box at
direcionadas
any
aos
time, and at
convidados
the end of
para que
all
eles possam
presentations,
respondê-los.
they will
Esse
be
webinar está
directed
sendo
to the guests.
gravado e vai ser mantido no
This
canal
webinar is
YouTube de
being recorded
Imaflora.
and
Esse
it will
debate
be
pode ser
maintained
revisto
later.
a
It will
qualquer
be
tempo no
kept later on
YouTube.
Imaflora's YouTube
Agradecemos
channel
novamente pela
so
presença
that
de
you
todas
can
e
watch it
todos, com a
once
expectativa de
again.
que esse será um
Thanks
encontro
again for
muito
your
produtivo e
presence.
enriquecedor
We're sure
e
that
que os
this will
tópicos
be a
abordados
very
hoje serão de
productive
grande
and
significância para
enriching
todos.
meeting. The
Então, sem mais
topics
delongas,
covered
deixo já
today
a
will
Isabel
be of
Garcia
great
Drigo,
use.
diretora do Programa de
Without
Ciência e
further ado,
Clima
I'll
e
call
Estratégia
Isabel
de
Garcia
Políticas
Drigo,
Públicas do
Director of the
Imaflora,
Climate
para dar
Science,
início à
Land Use and
apresentação
Public
sobre a
Policies
iniciativa
Program at
ThinkFood and Climate.
Imaflora
Bom
to
dia e
begin the
bem-vinda, Isabel.
presentation on the Think Food and
Bom
Climate
dia,
Initiative.
Nadine.
Good
Muito
morning.
obrigada. Bom
Thank
dia a
you so
todos e a
much. Thank you,
todas.
Nadine.
Bom dia a quem já
Good
está
morning,
conosco
everyone. Good
no YouTube
morning
assistindo essa
to
transmissão.
those who are
Estamos
watching with
super
us
felizes aqui do
on
lado de
YouTube
Imaflora
Live.
de
We're
contar para
really glad
vocês
here
o que é
at
essa
Imaflora
iniciativa
to
e
tell
colocamos
you
aí de
about
pé
what
com a
is this
Cátedra e
initiative.
o Cebrap
And we are
inicialmente, mas
together
também
with the
nossos
chair and Cebrap,
agregados.
but we have other partners
Então,
as
vamos
well.
lá, eu vou começar
So
para não tomar o tempo
I'll begin.
também de ninguém. Eu acho que todos já veem a apresentação.
I think that
Tá
everybody can
ok?
see the presentation. Great.
Bom, então, o que é esta iniciativa que é
So
pensar
what is
o
this
alimento, a
initiative,
produção de
which is
alimentos
to think
e a
about
sua conexão
food
com o clima?
production and its
Porque, primeiro, vamos
connection
começar
with
contando por
climate?
que a gente teve a
First, I'll
ideia de
talk about
criar, de
on
conceber tal
how
iniciativa.
we had this
Essas duas
idea
fotos aqui,
of
lado a
this
lado,
initiative. These
elas
two
falam um
pictures
pouco por
side by
si só,
side,
né? Então, e é um
they
exemplo da pecuária
speak
esporte,
for,
mas
for
como um
themselves.
exemplo, porque a gente poderia
And
pensar em qualquer outra
this is an example because
produção
we
que
could
vai
think
gerar
about
aí
any
um
other
produto
production that
final
could
no alimento.
generate
Mas o que a gente,
a
mais uma
food
vez, o que a gente
at the
precisa
end.
é sair
But what we
desses
really
passos
aim
da produção de
is to
alimentos
leave
que
this
ainda
food
está
production
contaminada
stage
por impactos
that is
ambientais e
still being
sociais, como
contaminated
o
by
desmatamento,
social and
né, ilegalmente, o
environmental
desmatamento
uh,
ilegal, mas
issues
também
such
qualquer
as
tipo de
deforestation
desmatamento em
and
função
illegal
da emergência
deforestation
climática
or any
que
other
a gente
kind of
tem que
deforestation
segurar
because of
para
our
reter
climate
carbono e não
emergency.
emitir.
We have
Mas a gente
to
sabe que a
stop
gente tem no Brasil,
emitting carbon.
especificamente, mas
But we
também
know
em
that
outros
in
países,
Brazil
a gente já tem
and in other
conhecimento
countries
técnico e
as well,
científico para, por
we
exemplo,
have
na pecuária
enough
de corte,
technical
termos
and
área
scientific
produtiva, com
knowledge to have
pastagens bem
productive
manejadas, com um componente
livestock
arbóreo na
breeding
pastagem que vai
with
ajudar a conservar a
pasture
biodiversidade. Então, a gente
pastures with
precisa fazer
the
essa transformação, essa
uh,
transição
components in
de
pastures that
sistemas
will
produtivos que
impact less the climate. And
compõem
we have to
o
do this
sistema
transition
agroalimentar.
that
Então,
compose
eu
the
queria mostrar, eu não vou explicar de
agri-food
jeito nenhum
system.
essa
I'm
figura
not
para
going to
vocês, mas ela foi
explain
muito
this
inspiradora,
chart, but it was
principalmente
very
para mim. Ela foi
inspiring
elaborada pelos
for
colegas
me,
da FAO, da União
and it
Europeia,
was created
junto da
by
entidade, porque ela
the
coloca essa estrutura
the
conceitual do
FAO
sistema alimentar. E se vocês
colleagues,
repararem
and
no
it helps
conjunto
and
do
shows.
sistema, essa
If
parte
you
mais
can see
cinza,
the
ela
center of the
mostra
system,
os componentes. Então, desde
it
a produção
shows the
vegetal e
companies of
animal, passando
vegetal
por
and animal production
armazenamento,
and
agregação,
goes
chegando
to
até lá na ponta do
storage
consumo. E
until
como os
consumption,
motores, vários
and
tipos de
how
motores, aí
all kinds of
influenciar
drivers will
como
influence
essa produção que começa dentro
how
de uma
this
fazenda, né,
production that
dentro de uma porteira e
starts
chega
in
lá na
a
prateleira do
farm
supermercado,
and
como ela vai
ends
ser
at
mais
a
ou menos
supermarket
impactante
shelf. So
ambientalmente, como
how
ela
it's
vai
going to be
contribuir para
more
uma
or
melhora do
less
equilíbrio
impacting
territorial e como
how it
ela vai
will impact
contribuir
the
para uma
land
segurança ou
and
uma
how
insegurança
it can
alimentar,
contribute
segurança
to
nutricional e a
food
saúde.
safety or
Então,
food
essa figura, ela é muito
unsafety.
inspiradora para mim, porque onde
So
que a
this
iniciativa quer
picture
atuar?
is quite
A iniciativa quer
inspiring
entender melhor
because it
esses motores,
shows
esses
where
vários motores,
the initiative
quer
can work.
entender
It's
os
important to understand
impactos,
all the drivers
mas já tem bastante
and
conhecimento
understand
sobre
all the
isso, que é
impacts, but we
principalmente
already
entender
have a lot
como a
of
gente
knowledge
acha
on this.
as
We want
soluções
to
no
understand
que já
how
existem,
to
em
implement
todos
the
os mercados,
solutions. There are
e
several
as que não
solutions
existem tão
already
claramente ainda, quais são. Esse é
in
o
place and
desejo, a
others need to be
intenção, a
implemented.
ambição
So this is the
dessa
ambition
pensar alimento e a sua
of
relação com
this
o
initiative,
clima
to
que
think
nós
about
queremos.
food and its
Os
relationship
parceiros, né? Nós já falamos
with
aí
to the climate.
da
These
Cátedra e
are
do
our
Cebrap, do Imaflora,
partners,
que nós
the Josué the
buscamos
Castro
esse
chair,
pensar juntos,
and
temos trabalhado há algum
we've
tempo,
been
mas
working
também já
together
temos
for a
outras
while.
parcerias se juntando a
And we
nós.
also have a
A Avina,
few
né, está nos
partnerships.
apoiando num
Avina
dos
is
produtos da
supporting us
iniciativa,
in
que
one
são
of
os
the
estudos sobre
products of the
diversificação
initiative,
na
which is the
agricultura. A
study
New
of
Partners
diversification
e
in
o Fórum Economia do
agriculture.
Futuro
Now
também nos
partners
apoiando
and
em
Future
cada
Economy Forum
disseminação das
is
ações
already helping
da
us in
iniciativa daqui para
disseminating
frente,
some
junto esse ano e
initiatives
do
from
ano
now
que vem.
on,
E outros parceiros que
and
queiram se agregar,
other
estamos super
partners as
abertos.
well.
E
We're
para
quite
que a gente está
open to it.
fazendo isso?
And
A
why
gente já
are we
falei um pouco,
doing
né, quando eu
this?
expliquei ali os motivos, a razão da
When
iniciativa ter sido criada. Mas os nossos
I already
principais
talked about
objetivos,
why
eles são
this
ainda
initiative
produzir
was
dados
created,
e conhecimento
but
baseados em
there
ciência
are
que
other things
informem a
like producing
transição.
data and knowledge
De
based on
novo, nós já
science to
temos
inform the just
um
transition
apanhado, um volume de
of
conhecimento
agriculture and
produzido,
livestock. We already
mas
have
exatamente os
a
nós,
huge
como
amount of
despertar em
knowledge
nós, como
produced,
construir uma
but how
governança
to
que
enact
leve
things,
realmente a
how to build a
implementação
governance
das
that
soluções, a
will
gente
implement
precisa, tem
solutions.
aí a
So
contribuir, tem
we
diversos
believe that
ainda que a gente pode
we have a
contribuir.
lot
E
to
para fazer
contribute
isso,
with.
fazendo isso, a gente precisa discutir
And to
esses
do this,
achados
we
com
need to
todo o conjunto
discuss
das
these
partes
findings
interessadas no assunto.
with all the
Das organizações da
groups
sociedade
involved,
civil,
from
dos
the
pesquisadores,
social,
dos representantes do setor
the
privado e
civil
setor público. E
society,
com tudo isso, a gente espera
partners from the private
fortalecer as
sector and
ações
governments,
de incidência
and
que
the
vão
scholars as
levar
well.
à
And we want
melhoria
to
ou à
strengthen
implementação
the
de fato dos
advocacy for the
instrumentos
improvement
de
of current
políticas
public
públicas
policies,
que já existem
design of new
ou
policies
eventualmente
and
daqueles que
implementation
precisam
plans
ser
to
criados
address
para dar conta
and
de
accelerate the
acelerar essa
transition.
transição, né? Para quem eu não preciso repetir, né? A gente
Oh, I
está
don't need
querendo
to repeat
falar
to
com
whom. We
tomadores
want
de
to talk
decisão,
to
com
decision
outras
makers,
organizações que compõem esse
with
ecossistema que olham
other
para os sistemas
organizations in the
alimentares, os
system
sistemas
that
agroalimentares.
are working
E a
with
gente
the
tem um
food
plano de
system. And
trabalho que
also
vai
we
mais ou
have
menos daqui
a
até
working
a
plan
COP30 no Brasil,
that
que é
from now
composto
on
por
until
três grandes
COP30
eixos.
will be
A
working
pesquisa,
basically
produção de
on three
conhecimento de
main
dados, como eu
axes:
disse, né, de
research,
novos dados, de
on
novas
data,
reflexões,
based on
levar
work
isso
on
para
data.
fóruns para
We need
discutir as
to take these
soluções
to
de como a gente
forums to
acelera
discuss
a
solutions
transição e
on how to
atuar
accelerate transformation
provendo,
and the
oferecendo
transition, and how to
insights e
provide
recomendações
insights and
para melhorar a
recommendations
política pública.
to improve public
A
policies.
roundtable, nessa mesa redonda
The
das
round
soluções para os
table
sistemas
will provide
agroalimentares é uma
solutions
cereja do
for
bolo da nossa
agri-food
iniciativa, que é a
solutions
nossa ação,
system.
que é a ação
This
para
is our
congregar
goal.
realmente essa
So
arena de
it's
diálogo com todos esses atores
an
que eu já
action
mencionei,
together all these
muito
different
focada
players,
nas
and
soluções,
it's quite
com um olhar
focused
no
on
Brasil, mas um
solutions
olhar regional e
with a
global
focus
também,
on
porque o
Brazil,
Brasil vai
but
conversar
also with
sobre
an eye
muitas
on regional
questões,
and global
por exemplo,
cooperation,
na
because Brazil has an
Conferência do
important
Clima,
role
na
on
Agenda para a
climate
Agricultura,
conference
que é um
on
grupo de trabalho
agriculture
que reúne
agenda,
para
which
todas
is
as
a
partes que
group of
compõem a
work that
convenção,
gather
né? E os
all
nossos
different
vizinhos
parts of
aqui,
the
os
convention.
sul-americanos,
Our
mas
South
também os
American
nossos
neighbors are present,
colegas
but
da
also
África, da
our
Ásia,
colleagues
e
from
todos têm muito
Africa
interesse
and
em saber como o
Asia,
Brasil
and they're all
pode
interested in knowing
e
how
tem um grande
Brazil
potencial de resolver
can
essa
and has a
questão da
great
produção de
potential to
alimentos
solve these
e o clima.
food
A gente vai
production
funcionar com encontros anuais
solutions. We
sincronizados
will
com os
have
principais
annual
eventos
meetings
internacionais em clima e
synced with the main international
biodiversidade,
events
né,
on
as
climate and
conferências
biodiversity,
e eventos que estão
conferences and
sendo feitos
events
esse
that
ano, né?
are
A
being
gente tem
placed
o
this year.
G20,
We
a
have
gente tem a
the
conferência
G20 meetings. We have
agora em junho, que
now in June
prepara a
we have the conference that will prepare the conference in Bonn. In Bonn, we will probably launch this roundtable. And during this year and next year, we will promote a few specific meetings and seminars to discuss the findings as they are produced. So thank you so much. I think I spoke within my time. So if anyone would like to write to me or to Imaflora, or you can write to us, and we'll be glad to talk a little bit more and also publicize the events that will be organized. Thank you so much.
Por essa fala tão esclarecedora e
Thank you
inspiradora
so
sobre
much,
vocês,
Isabel,
o povo
for this
brasileiro
enriching and
influente, né, da
enlightening
iniciativa ThinkFood&Climate que foi
talk,
desenhada, inclusive compartilhando que nós já
and
temos mais
also sharing
parceiros
that we
e
already
muita
have other
integração na busca por
partners,
exportação dos
and
nossos
this
principais objetivos. Muito obrigada.
is one of our
Chamo
main
agora Patrick
goals.
Caron, presidente
So
da
I'll call
Agropolis
now
Internacional da
Patrick
França.
Caron,
Patrick tem atuado na área
president
da
of Agropolis International
sustentabilidade
from
da cadeia
France. He has
produtiva
worked on the
global,
agri-food systems
analisando as
agenda from a global
oportunidades e
perspective,
desafios na
analyzing the
mobilização dos
opportunities and
interessados
challenges of
rumo à
mobilizing key
transformação para
actors towards
sistemas
the
sustentáveis.
transformation to
Seja muito
sustainable
bem-vindo, Patrick, e
system.
muito obrigada por seu esforço em compor essa
Thank
mesa
you
com a
for
gente
coming,
hoje.
Patrick.
Muito obrigada e boa tarde para todos. Muito obrigado,
Thank you.
Nadine.
Good afternoon,
Muito
everyone.
obrigada para
Thank you, Nadine. Thank you,
Cátedra,
Imaflora,
Castro,
and
Cebrap,
Josué de Castro chair as well, and Cebrap Sustainability for inviting us to this initiative, because this is quite inspiring.
Incluindo o T de Think, tem muito a
So
ver com outra
this
iniciativa
T
que a
on
gente
Think,
lançou
it has a lot to do with
aqui
us in
no
this
TD
initiative,
recentemente, que foi chamado de Pooling
because
Collective
we
Intelligence,
were working
juntando
on a project called Pulling
inteligência coletiva.
Collective
Então, o P
Intelligence.
da inteligência
And so we have the
e o
I
T
on
de
intelligence
tem
and
muito a ver,
T
ele
on
tinha
Think. It has a lot to do with us,
sintonia.
and it
Então, por isso eu
holds
fico
synergy
muito
with
feliz de
this
estar com
project. So
vocês hoje.
that's why I'm really glad to be
Essa
here with you
iniciativa que a
today.
gente lançou,
This
que eu vou fazer
initiative
um
that we've
exemplo
launched,
como ela
and
é,
I'm going to
e
explain
quais
a little bit
seriam
about this as well,
as conexões com
and what are
o
the
ThinkFood and Climate.
connections with the
Tem,
ThinkFood and Climate.
nasceu de
It was
três observações.
born from
Por
three
acaso, desculpe o meu
observations.
sotaque,
First of all,
meu sotaque um
sorry
pouco
for
pesado.
my
A primeira
broken accent,
o fato de a gente
but
observar
the first
durante
thing is that
os últimos
we
anos
have
uma
observed
multiplicação
in the
de
last
esforços
years a
e de
multiplication
expertise que muitas
of
vezes permanece
expertise
sectoriais.
that many
Aliás,
times are kept within their
creio que a gente
sectors.
conhece muito bem a IPCC
We
sobre
know the
o clima,
IPCC
que
report
recebeu
about the climate report
prêmio Nobel,
that
então ficou
received the Nobel
muito
Prize,
famoso, mas
and
a
it
gente
was
tem
really famous.
biodiversidade
But we have to think about the biodiversity
alimentar, o HLP,
and also food
ficou
safety.
envolvido durante alguns anos.
And I was
Tem
really involved
para
in this works. And
One
now
Health, a
we have to
conexão
think
de
about One Health
saúde,
and
e tem vários
Health
grupos,
Connection. And also there are
tanto a nível
several
global
other
como a
groups
nível nacional,
globally and nationally that
tenta
have been
fazer síntese do que a gente sabe, do
working
que
and
é
trying to
nossa
do a
área,
synthesis on
para
what we know and what we don't
auxiliar,
know,
para fornecer
to
informações e
provide
reflexões para
informations
tomar
and
decisões. Mas a
reflections
forma desses
for
países que a
decision
gente vê
makers.
agora é que cada
And
trabalha
what we're seeing in this panels
setor
is that
dele.
everyone is
Há
working
pouca
in their own sector,
conexão
and
de setor para outro.
there's very little
A segunda
connection
raiz é que
between different
a gente
sectors.
viu muito bem nos últimos anos, apesar
Uh,
de dizer tem que
also,
trabalhar
we've been
através
hearing a lot.
dos
We have to
setores,
work through our sectors.
a alimentação
And we've been hearing that
uma temática particular porque ela
food
junta,
has
ela
specific
faz
mathematics
conexão com
because
os demais
it
setores.
creates a
E a
link, it
crise
has a
que a
link
gente
with
está
different
passando,
sectors. And the
no clima, na
crisis that we have
biodiversidade, na
on climate,
pobreza,
on biodiversity,
na
on
saúde,
poverty,
tem muito
and
ver
in
com
health has a lot to
a
do
alimentação e
with
que,
the food
respectivamente, mudar a alimentação passa a ser
distribution, and it changes a lot in terms of
driver, uma capacidade
the,
de
the,
transformar o
the
mundo para
people's
mais
people's access to food. So
sustentabilidade.
it's
E a
a way to
alimentação
change the
fica
world.
no coração
Food
de
is
muitas
in
crises que a
the
gente está passando.
heart of many crises that we're going
A
through.
terceira convicção é
The
que
third
eh,
link
cada vez
is
mais
that
tem
more and more
vendedores de dúvidas e
we
vendedores de
have
certezas,
doubt,
faz com que o
uncertainty,
diálogo
sellers.
passa a ser muito difícil.
So
Organizar uma mesa de diálogo,
dialogue
como
starts
Isabel
is
nos
really
disse,
hard.
passa a ser muito
As
difícil
Isabel
porque as
said,
posições de
the
indivíduos
creating a
e dos
dialogue is
outros é
really
muito mais
hard
de
because people's position
deslegitimizar
is
o
more
adversário
based
do que tentar
on
construir algum futuro junto.
disle
Então, com essas três
dislegitimizing
convicções, a
the
gente
opponent
teve
than
como
creating a
projeto
food future.
de juntar
So we've
a
had a
IPCC, a
project of
IPBES,
gathering IPCC,
HLPE, One Health
AGLPE, One
e
Health,
demais painéis,
and the
and to look,
other panels,
tentar oferecer
and trying
espaço
to
para
provide a space
esses painéis,
for
juntos,
these different
nesse momento,
panels
fazer análises comum
and
e
have
contribuir com
common
essa
analysis
inteligência
and
coletiva
contribute
para
with this
transformar os
collective
sistemas
intelligence to
alimentares.
transform the
Tivemos
food systems.
diferentes
We've had
etapas, mas a última
different
foi
stages, but the
evento
last
aqui em
one
Montpellier,
was an event
edição de
here at
300 pessoas, e o
Montpellier
Ricardo
with 300
Abramovay
people, and
fez
Ricardo
a honra
Abramovay
de participar.
gave us the honor of being
Hoje,
present.
muitos diversos do mundo,
We've had
desde
people from
profissionais,
different parts of the
pessoas da
world,
sociedade civil, dos
people from
governos,
civil
da
society,
academia,
from
dos
governments,
órgãos
from the
profissionais,
academia, and
a
different
ideia
professionals.
não
And the
era
idea
de dizer
is
o
not
que tinha que ser
saying
feito, mas muito mais
what had to be
de
done,
olhar
but
para as
but
iniciativas
looking at
existentes, porque
the
tem
existing
muitos
initiatives,
desafios de
because there are several
transformação
initiatives
dos
of
sistemas
transformations
alimentares.
of a
Por
food
exemplo,
system.
na cidade de
For
São
instance,
Paulo, teve
in the city of São
uma
Paulo,
luz, a
there was
municipalidade, o Estado e
a
a
group
academia
at the
apresentou uma
University of
experiência
São Paulo
fantástica.
that
Então, a
has
ideia era
presented a
muito mais
fantastic
de
experience.
aprender
So it's more
dessas
a
iniciativas e de ver quais são as
learning about these
condições
initiatives
para
and
transformar
understanding
os
what are the
sistemas
conditions
alimentares
to
e construir essa
change the food
inteligência,
systems and how to build
inteligência conectada.
these
A gente não
collective
queria de
intelligence.
jeito nenhum criar uma nova
We didn't want
instituição.
to create a
As
new
instituições estão
institution.
demais.
We
Nós
have already a
temos,
lot
pelo
of
contrário,
institutions,
oferecer
and
espaço
we can
para
provide a
cérebros, para
space for
instituições,
brains,
para
for
indivíduos trabalhar juntos
institutions and
e
individuals to work
organizar
together
o
and
pensamento e a
organize
ação.
the thought and the
Das,
action. And one of
dos motos que
these,
a gente
the
elaborou
drivers that we've
como,
created
eu vou
is
falar em inglês
and
para isso, eh, how to make
is
action
how to make
knowledgeable
action
and knowledge
knowledgeable
actionable.
and
Essa
knowledge actionable.
dupla
So it's
conexão
this
entre o conhecimento
double
e a
connection
ação,
between knowledge
através
and
do
action
esforço da
through
inteligência coletiva,
a,
era pouco
collective
a
intelligence. It's a bit of
nosso objetivo,
it's
com
our goal
a
with
ambição de
the
conectar
ambition
tanto os
of
setores
connecting
e
between different
olhar
sectors and
para a alimentação através
look
de uma conexão
at
entre
food
setores,
through
de
a
conectar as
connection
diferentes
between sectors
categorias
and
de
connecting
atores
different
e de
categories of
transformar o que a gente
players
chama de
and
interface
changing
entre
interface between
ciência e política,
science and
science policy
politics
interface, e como
and
transformar
how to
e fazer em que
change
elas
and
trabalhem diferentemente e não só
work in a
para uma
different way
transferência do
and
saber daqueles que sabem para aqueles que têm
not
que
only a
usar o
transference
saber,
and do a
mas
transference of those who
direto
know
e
to
de
those who don't
conectar
know
o local com o
and
nacional
to connect
e
the
com
place
o global. Então, as
and the global.
perspectivas para isso
So the
é de criar,
perspectives
como a gente
for
falou,
that are to create,
risk-safe
as we said,
space,
a
espaço
risk-safe place,
segurada, onde a
a
gente pode
safe
tomar risco,
space where we can
porque
take risks
agir para transformar o mundo
and
é,
act because to
fazer
act to
com
transform the
muitos
world
riscos e tem
carries
que
with it many
é
risks,
construir esse espaço onde a gente
and
pode
we need to build a space where
tratar de
we can
controvérsias,
deal
respeitando
with
diferentes pontos de vista,
controversies,
mas construindo
taking into account
posições
different viewpoints,
coletivas
but
que levem em
building
conta
collective
essas
positions
diferenças.
which take these
Para
differences
a
into account.
segunda, então, o Risk Safe Space é para
For the
construir e
risk
tratar de
safe space,
controvérsias
the
e
risk safe
também para
space, the second
aprender
item,
das experiências,
it's also
principalmente
to
a
learn
nível
from
das grandes
experiences,
cidades, para o
especially
que
at
se
a
trata de sistemas
major city
alimentares. Tem
level
agora
with their
experiências fantásticas.
food systems.
E
Now
a terceira
they are going through
ideia
a
é de
fantastic
construir esse
experience.
espaço
And thirdly,
onde é
to
possível
build a space where it is
tratar
possible
dos assuntos
to
que
deal with
são
issues
importantes para transformar não
which are
só os sistemas
important
alimentares,
to
mas a
transform not
planeta.
just food
Só para
systems, but the
dar uma
planet too.
ideia
But just to
como que
give
a
you an
gente pode
idea
repensar
of how
as
we
regras do
can
comércio internacional para
reconsider,
assegurar
rethink international
uma
trade
melhor
rules in order
sustentabilidade, porque
to
esse comércio
work
internacional
towards
foi
better
pensado
sustainability,
com
because international
paradigma
trade
completamente
was
diferente daquele da
devised with a
sustentabilidade.
totally different paradigm
E
than that
finalmente a
of
gente espera
sustainability.
também que os
And
grandes
finally,
painéis de
we
expertise
also hope that the
aí
major
pode encontrar uma maneira de
expertise
trabalhar juntos.
panels
Então, e por isso
can
eu vou
find a way to work together.
finalizar com isso, terminar com
So
isso.
I'll wrap up here.
Eu penso que tem
I think that
alinhamento muito grande
there is
entre essa
major
iniciativa e o
alignment
Think
between
Food
this
and
alignment
Climate.
and Think
As
Food
três
and
palavras
Climate.
de Think Food
The
and Climate
three
fala
words,
muito
Think
para a
Food
nossa
and
iniciativa.
Climate,
Eu espero que o
connect a lot
contrário,
to our
o inverso
initiative.
seja
And we hope that
seja
the
também
opposite,
real.
the inverse, also happens, of course, the vice versa, I should
A
say.
minha convicção é que temos
My
que unir forças
conviction is that we
para
have to join
articular melhor,
forces in order to
por
better
lado, a
liaise
capacidade de
and work
experimentar
towards a
através de
way to
iniciativas que não
experiment
são
through
necessariamente
initiatives
reprodutivas,
which are not
mas que
necessarily just
ajudem
reproductive
a
and that
entender
help
melhor quais são
to
as
better understand
portas de entradas para a
the
transformação e que
entrance, the
a partir
entries
daí
towards transformation, if you will,
oferece material
and
para
also to offer
ah,
to
desenhar e
provide material
implementar
in order to
iniciativas em
design and
outras
implement
escalas, a escala
initiatives on
nacional,
other
neste caso,
scales,
seja local, ou a
national
escala
scale, for
global,
example, local or
para
global,
contaminar
whatever it is,
através
in
dessas
order to
iniciativas
contaminate,
e
so to speak,
transformar o
through
mundo.
these
Então, fico muito feliz
initiatives and
de
thus
estar com vocês
contaminate,
hoje, mais uma vez.
quote unquote,
Obrigado.
the world through these initiatives. So thank you very
Muito
much. I'll
obrigada,
leave it
Patrick,
there.
por
Thank you
compartilhar com a
very much,
gente as
Patrick,
experiências da
for
Agropolis, por
sharing
destacar os
the
pontos de contato
for
entre as
sharing your
iniciativas e a
experiences with
necessidade,
us
né, de conexão real e efetiva, de diálogo,
through
de interface
Agropolis,
entre
and
os
also
diversos
then talking
atores e
about
setores
the
sociais, com
need
essa
for
contaminação
interface and
positiva,
debate
como você
among
disse agora no final. Muito
politicians and
obrigada.
players through this
Dando
positive contamination
continuidade,
that you
Arilson
mentioned.
Favareto, coordenador do
I would
Cebrap
now like
Sustentabilidade,
to
um dos
welcome,
parceiros da
I'd
iniciativa
now
Think
like
Food and
to welcome
Climate, é
Arilson
quem apresenta agora,
Favareto,
trazendo um alerta
coordinator
sobre
of
a
Cebrap
necessidade de unificar
Sustentabilidade,
as
who will
diversas
talk to us
iniciativas
about the need
da
to
agenda de
integrate
sistemas
many initiatives
agroalimentares, hoje
from the
espalhadas pelo
agri-food
Brasil,
systems
e a
scattered
partir de
throughout
um olhar
Brazil at the moment,
sistêmico, garantir
and
que as
based on a
políticas
systemic
públicas
view,
trabalhem em
guarantee that
conjunto
public
para esse
policies
objetivo comum.
work
Bem-vindo,
together
Arilson.
towards this common objective. So welcome,
Obrigado,
Arilson, you
Nadine.
have the floor.
Bom dia a
Thank you,
todos, a
Nadine.
todos que estão
Good
nos
morning, good
acompanhando aqui
afternoon to
nessa
everyone
manhã.
who is with us
Eu
this morning.
queria começar registrando a
I'd
minha
like to
dupla
start off
satisfação de estar
by
participando aqui desse nosso
recording
momento, desse
here
nosso evento.
how doubly
Primeiro, na
satisfied I am
qualidade
to
de
be here
coordenador do Cebrap
at this
Sustentabilidade
meeting.
e
First of
diretor
all, as the
científico do
coordinator of
Cebrap.
Cebrap
Eu tenho que dizer
Sustentabilidade
que,
and the scientific director
para a
of Cebrap.
instituição Cebrap, é
And I'd
uma
like to say that
honra
for the
enorme a gente
institution,
estar ao
Cebrap,
lado do
it's a
Imaflora,
great honor
ao
for
lado
us
da
to be
Cátedra Josué de
beside
Castro, da Faculdade de Saúde Pública da USP,
Imaflora, the
lançando essa
USP
iniciativa. São
Public
duas
Health
instituições que são
University
referência para nós
and
que
the
participamos desse
Climate
debate
Science
sobre
and by Imaflora program, and to talk about the system transition among the food system. We are part of these organizations, and it does us very proud. It makes full sense to us. Also, I'm very happy to be in the company of two colleagues, two longtime friends, Isabel and Ricardo Abramovai, and two colleagues for whom I have great admiration, Patrick and Marcelo, for everything they've done and the way the stand they take for and within this debate. So I'm very happy to be here this morning. As we don't have much time, I'll go straight to the point. So there are three of them. Nothing new for many of us, I think, who are here or people following us, but I think it's worth underlining them. The most obvious, probably, of the three is to highlight how relevant these next few years are vis-a-vis acceleration of a transition and direction or guidance for fair and sustainable agri-food systems. We tend to think that the period you're in is more special, so to speak, than others. But for 2 and 3 years, we've been saying this, and they are indeed very important. I'd like to just mention a few aspects to illustrate this. As everyone knows, we are already living under 1.5 degree temperature increase. So what we had projected for the 21st century is already knocking at our door. One of the evident reflexes of this is, or are, the intensification of extreme events. In the last few days, we have seen events like this happening in Brazil, as is the case with the tragedy in Rio Grande do Sul, also in parts of Asia, Africa. Similar events have happened. This should provide us with a sense of urgency, a greater sense of urgency. This all happens just with 2025 around the corner, where we're going to have a 10-year balance of the, or stock take of the Paris Agreement. It won't be a positive balance with everything that's happened with regard to climate and everything we had hoped to achieve great advances with regard to the 17 sustainable objectives. We do not hope we will reach these goals that were agreed back then. In the case of Brazil, we have a group of factors that need to be well used. Brazil is the G20 president this year. They will take on the leadership of the BRICS group this year, and also the COP next year, when we're going to take a stock take of the Paris Agreement. And people cannot do anything but commit to ambitious goals. We know these ambitious goals only frustrate us if they are not followed up by equal solidity, ambition, with regard to the implementation means. So we have the obligation to try to influence these decision-making spaces, which will happen from now until next year, especially because they are essential for this kind of ambition. That's the first thing I wanted to remember. Our initiative at this point exists because of the relevance of what will be happening in this period. The second aspect I'd like to mention is that, in a way, I think we are already undergoing transition in the agri-food systems, because currently what was considered exotic, so to speak, 10 years ago, I used to go to science congresses and there was a table for people to talk about sustainability, climate issues, etc. And this table was given to them like, oh, let's give them some space. This has changed radically now. Even colleagues who are very much in the debate, and even companies who until recently did not have technology perspectives, are coming into these meetings, but they are imposing themselves more slowly and less consistently than would be necessary. We are sitting on a paradox, I think. We've never had so many initiatives, so much experimentation in terms of practices aligned with the idea of sustainable transition. At the same time, we have the intensification of environmental degradation vectors, which is happening very swiftly. Greenhouse gas emissions are at a speed that is beyond intolerable. We have many health issues globally which are directly connected to our production and consumption standard, food consumption and production, that is. So, in the face of all these events, food and health has great, so to speak, participation. All these systems must be considered and treated as an essential part of the solution. In recent years, we are seeing more and more clearly that there is not just environmental insustainability, but financial insustainability of the model to sustain the agri-food systems. This, which was published last year, shows us that the food production system worldwide, this production is lost because of extreme events, to name but one. Insurance has increased greatly because of extreme events. 2 months ago, one of the main climate scientists, Johan Ostrom, said that if we take into account all the negative events that have to do with consumption and production of agri-food systems, we have the costs already superseding what is produced. So it's not just about environmental, but also economic rationality. So when we take all these local innovations and take the set of what exists in terms of incentives, in terms of conventional practices, we come to a zero-sum or negative-sum game. So this balance is essential. This means something in this transition strategy has to be changed. The third topic I'd like to mention, to add to our conversation, is a kind of a warning. What is this warning? Nowadays, many of the technologies that are being projected or as climate solutions potentially may and do have a negative effect on the inequality agenda because of the model they are based on for experimentation. Two examples. One alternative which is mentioned frequently is artificial protein or lab meat, which can have a positive environmental impact, but because of the business model that has been designed, it tends to have a negative impact on inequalities. I don't have time to go into details. That's just the topic on the table. And another issue, which is very important in the case of Brazil, are the alternatives for moderate intensification of cattle raising and reforesting agriculture, which may also have a negative impact on the land market and the labor market, depending on the market the government that implements it. I'm not saying the experiments should not happen. I'm just talking about the type of incentives and the undesirable effects that may be contained in these initiatives and that can be applied depending on the business model we adopt. So these 3 points are part of the concerns that mobilize our organizations in order to propose an initiatives such as Think Food and Climate. And I would like to end up by saying that simply one of the things within this initiative is to create a space which in our viewpoint must be necessarily plural. As Patrick said, it must be a space to debate controversies and find convergence based on differences. It's not a space to reinforce dichotomies. It's to reinforce converging dialogues. And for that, we're going to have one or some ideas which can guide these ideas. Professor Ricardo Abramovay has insisted on the idea of breaking with the monotony of food systems. I know he's going to talk about this. I won't go into that too deeply, but it is efforts like this that can help us to promote a turning point, swift change. Brazil can help us with this because we have the expertise, capability, leadership in the business sector. We have innovative managers. The least we can do is to create a space within which these convergences appear and within which they form a kind of a roadmap which would allow us to do what we frequently claim or even demand from the energy production sector. We were at last year's COP meeting, And one issue frequently touched on was a phase-out strategy regarding fossil fuels. I would use the same parallel idea. We need a phase-out strategy of the conventional production and consumption models within the agri-food systems. So we have to work with a diversity of paths and models, but this diversity must be guided by certain principles that signal this fair, sustainable transition that we so desire. If our initiatives contribute towards creating such a space, I think we will have fulfilled a major objective. So that is the invitation I leave here. I think I stuck to my time well. So thank you very much, Nadine. And I now give the floor to my other colleagues for their part of the debate. Yes, strictly within time. Very, very, very good. Thank you for sharing your ideas with us, Arilson. And we want to consolidate, of course. May we consolidate this sense of urgency, may it be the guiding force within what we want to guide this transformation work. I'd like to remind you that questions can be made in the chat box at any time, and at the end, they will be guided or directed at the speakers so they can answer. Now, studies show that 60% of the world middle class will be concentrated in 11 Asian Pacific countries in the next few years, and giving these nations a central role in the definition of global trends vis-à-vis consumption and production. So, in the following presentation, Marcelo Brito will comment on what the consumption trends indicate. Marcelo, Executive Secretary of Amazonia Legal, you have the floor. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with great people. Nadine, Patrick, Ricardo, Arilson, Isabel, Marcelo. I'd like to say, first of all, I'm not a researcher or a scientist. I'm a scholar and an enthusiast in the area. Since this subject has to do with our agro-environmental study, it's very useful to talk about the future of Brazil's agriculture. I think we are on the right path. I would like to talk about market structure. First of all, linking with the world. Major transformation will only happen if we are able to make these instances of transformation at a global scale. We need scale. Why am I saying this? I'm going to take an example from the US. If you're going to buy food at Whole Foods stores, which is a major grocery store, they are very concerned about how, where food is produced. This creates an annual revenue of $16 billion. If you go to Walmart, that sells to the US mass population, there is no such strict demands that Whole Foods has. The revenue is now $280 billion. So we have a path to tread that is screaming at us, something has to be done. When we go through Europe, it's no different. The main countries in Europe, in these countries, expenditure on food is not even 10% of the family expenses. So in these countries, you have a willingness for transformation that is higher than in those, for example, Greece, Spain, Portugal, Italy, where economic situation is not that great, where the expenditure on food is higher, so food has to be taken into account. Within this time, the food themes launched in the COP in Egypt gained traction in Dubai last year and even more in Brazil next year, and they come along with all these proposals for new technologies, etc. I'd like to remind you that the difference between traditional agriculture and regenerative agriculture, with everything that involves the latter, it's like comparing allopathy and homeopathy. With one, we cure a headache in 15 minutes with a pill, knowing that that pill will harm you in the long run. In regenerative sectors like homeopathy, you have to predict that in 15 days you will have a headache. 4 days before you start taking medication, 4 days later, it will pass. It works the same way. And there is technology proving this. We go into the second axis, which is financing. We need to convince the world financial system that they need to finance this new kind of agriculture using the same interest rates or even less, but without having the risk analysis history for vis-a-vis financial and risk and agronomy risks, but analyzing through benefits because of the climate problems. The third axis, that's the most difficult of all, because it is to convince citizens that they need to change a practice that is 50, 100 years old, practiced by families, at the risk of that if it loses out, he loses his job, right? His crop is his breadwinner. So those are the key transformation pillars under a primary point of view and agriculture itself.
So we have an issue of production because of climate changes, and we see what was Brazil going to 3 degrees. It's a absurd transformation, and I'm sure that this transition will happen. The problem is how long it will take, and Asia is the one who's going to do this transition, and I want to show you quickly why I think Asia is the one who's going to do this transition. Just let me know if you can see my screen. Okay, in this small circle that we see here, these are the countries of the Asian countries. Here we have more people than in the rest of the world. Within this circle, we have 60% of the world youth. And Brazil is not there anymore. So within the circle, according to World Bank, until 2030, you will have more than 60% of the world middle class. And who moves the world is the middle class. This I'm showing quickly. All kinds of world transformation, they went through Asia, and the impacts in commercial trade interactions. This is interesting. Countries from MENA, they have diminishing their debts and increasing their investments would swap what happening in Latin America. So even there, the transformation is within Asia. But I want to bring your attention to this research, which is the most recent in the sector. It was done in company, done with different countries on consumption categories, more than 16,000 interviewed. And here they divided the 5 items that they classify as sub-items. It's environmental consciousness, environmental and social consciousness, consciousness on health, lifestyle, health consciousness, and best value for money. And people say, oh, Europe is the place of the world with social environmental place, and the research shows that it isn't. They're just the same United States, Europe, and APAC. But when we talk about health and sustainability, we can see the difference of Asian countries when related to other regions in the world. And when we talk about this awareness as well, in Asia, there's the idea that only young people are concerned with this, that old people are not concerned about this. But this myth has been broken. The importance of sustainable awareness You can see here by age groups, and we see this environmental awareness. We see that there is a very little difference from 60 years onwards. And even when we divide this concern on economical groups, when we see the middle class and the high class, we see a very little difference. So the pandemic brought a process of awareness advancement, and there was a leap in this market that has never had happened before. So, but people ask me, what are the items that the consumers want the most, or they are more concerned about, or more interested in? Number one, it's multiple choice. So you had like 100 things you could choose. Number one, healthy ingredients, 20%. Number two, natural products, 18%. Three, additive chemical-free products, 15%. Organic products, 11%. It's amazing. Sustainable packaging, 8%. Products with the symbols about sustainability that have already been acknowledged in this field, 8%, and also local sourcing, 7%. So this is a significant transformation in a consumer market. I've highlighted here 3 areas that are really important. These are 3 countries really populous. First one, China, with natural and sustainable symbols. In the third one, chemical additive free. In India, natural in first, healthy ingredients is in second place, and organic in third place. In Indonesia, we have chemical additive free in first, natural second, and healthy ingredients 70%. And specific data on Indonesia is that they have an example on low salt ingredients. So from country to country, you have small differences. And here we discuss 90% are willing to pay premium for better products. And here is the say-do gap. So they measure the difference because people say, okay, are you sustainable? Yes, of course. Do you want to transform more? Yes, of course. And when you check directly if that is already happening, there is a huge gap in all of these countries. But the most interesting thing that although we have this gap, the volume of consumers that have this embedded in themselves in terms of purchasing structure is quite interesting. But what are the gaps that we need to face, and what are the challenges so that we can speed up this process? High price is an issue, and we know that any sustainability transformation process will generate costs, but afterward it will be lower in the chain. So it's 16% is high price, lack of information, 15%. They don't trust what brands claim, 6%, lack of variety, 12%, lack of sustainable alternatives, 9%, time consuming to find sustainable products is 11%, low availability in the market, 10%, and products that are not entirely sustainable with low quality, 14%, and lower quality, 7%. So we see all the proper levels can improve this a lot. We can see in countries how important the companies are in this process, and this pressure cannot diminish 40%, 40% in Vietnam. South Korea and said that companies and brands are very important in this process, and also in Vietnam, also 40%. And now I want to explain to you why this process is going to be slower, because it has a geopolitical issues involved. To change the production infrastructure, we need to understand that in the space of people, we have 400 million small producers. Smallhold farmers is a concept. Smallhold farmers is the one that it's a family runs the business. So 400 million smallhold farmers that respond to 40% of Asian agricultural produce. So the government will not let them hanging. So this transformation will happen in small productions. And naturally, this is a slower cycle that can be sped up if the tip of the consumption matches with the offer. And this is how we should discuss in the national and international society. So thank you so much. My time is over, and
Muito obrigada, Marcelo.
thank you, Marcelo.
Esgotado, mas agradeço muito por compartilhar
I
com a
really
gente
thank you
slides,
for
informação,
talking about us
muito
about the pillars of
informação,
transformation of
dados que vai
consumption
ser
and
vistos,
production
porque
and
a
everything that is involved, because
classe média asiática
Asia
vai ser o
and
centro dessa transformação,
Asian
inclusive
middle class will
quebrando
be
alguns
the
mitos em
center
torno do
of
tema,
this
isso
transformation,
é
breaking a few
fundamental.
myths.
E para encerrar as apresentações
And
do webinar,
to
eu queria
close the
convidar
webinar
agora para falar
presentation,
o
I
professor
invite
titular
Ricardo Abramovay,
Castro,
uh,
professor sênior do
professor
Instituto de
of the
Energia da
Josué de
Universidade de
Castro
São
Chair and
Paulo.
senior
Ele
professor
pode apresentar
at
agora
the
as
Institute of Energy
reflexões
and
sobre as
Environment at the
soluções
University of São
agroalimentares
Paulo.
dominantes na atualidade,
Ricardo now presents data
dando
from the
alerta
World
de
Bank
forma
report that
proposital
demonstrates
sobre a
how the food
contribuição
system
desses sistemas
contributes
para a crise
significantly
climática
to the
global.
global
Lembrando que
climate
vocês podem deixar
crisis.
perguntas no chat
And
para
I'm
a gente
reminding you
responder ao
that
final
you
da
may leave your
apresentação de
questions in the
todos.
chat
Então,
box and that we'll have
seja
time
bem-vindo, Ricardo, a palavra é sua.
to answer this at the end of the presentation. Thank you, Nadine. It's a great pleasure being here with such wonderful colleagues, and Isabel organized this initiative. Patrick, my dear friend from such a long time, and that who has an amazing background and career, and Josué working at Cebrap, and Marcelo, who's a fundamental leader in the sense of thinking about agribusiness and reliving uh, all kinds of polarizations, and have that and had an important role in the sectorism, fundamentalism that ruled us in the last 4 years. So it's a great pleasure being here and listening to these presentations. And although they are different, they are very convergent. I think it's quite important to understand that one of the conditions that allowed Brazil to go from a huge importer to a huge exporter is the way how they worked with the agriculture in the Cerrado region. This transformation allowed to increase productivity and made Brazil to be an important player in global scene. Science and technology created by Embrapa and also different universities. They were quite important for that. This transformation is one of the most iconic issues that since the Second World War rules the world and the global philanthropy. There will be an event in June in Rio about philanthropy, and agri-food systems will be approached. The Norman Borlaug approach with Rockefeller Foundation shows what ruled the scientific and scientific and political groups at the time. And this was shown in three objectives. Brazil has a huge role in this. First, increase the offer of calories. That means to make homogeneity in different countries to produce seeds. That's the essence of the Green Revolution. Second, to increase the offer of proteins through genetic transformations on birds and swines, and basically increase that in societies that relied on grains for, and also to diminish the gap between wholesale and retailers. These three things are really important. This has been changed. 1 in 3 inhabitants in the 60s really had access to food, and this is even worse today, but this means 1 in every 10 people has a food safety. So if it's not in animals, this is quite generalized in multilateral organizations, from the most important scientific organizations, in social movements, and business organizations as well. When we see that this foods global system responds to 1/3 of the greenhouse effects, as the recent report shows, Recite for Our Life plans, and it shows that the agri-food system is the main driver of biodiversity. It responds to some of the most important pollution issues with animal waste as well. So it's important to have this Asian awareness that Marcelo was showing us. And this system is at the origin of overweight global pandemic. And it's one of the diseases that kill more, the non-transmissible disease such as diabetes type 2, obesity, and so on. So from the most contemporaneous tropical country, our challenge is that Brazil will lead the ecological transition. The EU has a lot of limits. They had the plan of transforming the agri-food ecological transformation that was really ambitious, but this plan was totally buried. We cannot say, oh, the Europeans were realistic. This kind of things is impossible. It's important to have an ecological transition on agriculture. So we, as Arilson said, as Patrick showed, we Brazilians, we have science, technology, social movements on agriculture, of citizens and consumers, and business ability for that. But what is this transformation about? The World Economic Forum, produced with the help of the Accenture consulting company, we're talking about the dominant sectors, the thinkers of the world in the financial world. They launched a program called New Frontiers of Nutrition. It's quite interesting when we go into the internet, when we saw the short videos that they are transmitting from this program on. So they're doing a very interesting campaign towards fighting the ultra-processed products. I've never seen the World Economic Forum fighting an important sectors in its own composition. And they published in December a document that in which they say that when the main objective of the agri-food system was to provide calories and proteins in large scale to the world, this time has gone. The agri-food system needs to have other goals. And Marcelo is quite right when he said that our problem scale, but a scale in a dimension that cannot be the replica of what was the Green Revolution. It's not the scale based on agro, livestock, landscape.
What the World Economic Forum is questioning is a system where human food loses connections to the territories. Marcelo actually mentioned that in his poll survey carried out in Asia, and about if you depend on anonymous, monotonous, standardized products with items that are not in the traditional kitchen, which contribute to a modification, so to speak, of the agri-food aspect, so to speak, and also impacts people's health. It's difficult to find such an extensive contestation for the current situation vis-à-vis food, especially from an industrial think tank. In Brazil, I think especially the Ministry of Finance is trying to move in that direction. The text actually proposes that producers be paid based on the diversity and nutritional power of their crops, and that they be supported to receive products in their communities that are based on sustainable practices. That's the opposite of what the situation is now. In the US, for example, 94% of subsidies go towards only 6 products in a context where extreme climate events are imposing greater losses on production. As Arilson said, the expenditure on agricultural insurance should reach $1.37 trillion. Industry, we have to include them. The study by the World Economic Forum says that Brazil should exclude all damaging ingredients and include products which are as healthy as non-processed. I think that it's a question of creating totally new products, reinventing the formula that exists, and non-processed foods being included. The study published in the Telegraph last September moves in the same direction. The global agri-food system was monotonous and is translated by the fact that 75% of calories it offers are concentrated in only 6 products. The discussion actually is the famous land sharing and land sparing. In other words, the green revolution mindset is let us concentrate technical progress on a few areas so we can free up areas for biodiversity. This is currently unsustainable. We need biodiversity in the interior part of agri-cattle areas so that they are less and less susceptible to climate crises. Think Food and Climate is being created for us to dive deeper into this discussion. I think our main challenge, and here I would like to actively recommend the article published by Marcelo recently in the AgriFeed newsletter, that the opportunities given by the current functioning of the agri-food system offered in Brazil, the opportunities are enormous. But we have a contradiction there. Our macroeconomic balance currently depends on the monotony of our agricultural and stock production. The continuity of the production of this sector, on the other hand, brings with it enormous systemic risks. In the last year, agricultural losses due to climate were over 300 billion I don't know if dollars or reais. The increase in soy production, instead of having a bolo effect, it has a Jerus effect. In other words, as soy is more and more productive, it is occupying more and more space, including in the Amazon region. And the big food players, right, the major companies who are actually central players in this transformation, are transforming favorable infrastructures favorable to this expansion of soy in the Amazon region and the Cerrado Savannah regions. Many may say we're producing food, but I think something we'll have to discuss also is, do you think China will continue to increase the dependence of their supply on proteins coming from so far away and so highly threatened by the climate crisis? Could the animal raising models, the chair and the Josué de Castro chair and other entities can, help to look at this? Could China by itself consumes on its own 45% of antibiotics destined for animals worldwide? I think that some issues we have ahead of us in this last minute I'd like to mention. So many big food companies, such as major landowners in Brazil, now feel the climate crisis effect and are seeking technologies to fight these effects. Thus far, these technologies have not altered the monotony of our agricultural landscape, but some of them try to recover land biodiversity and attenuate the extreme climate events, their effect. We have to see what these changes are actually about. This is, I think, should be the first research project of Think Food and Climate. Regenerative and organic animal food is growing a lot in Brazil. I'm not just talking about native sugar San Francisco farm. I'm talking about other initiatives. What business models are geared towards the emergence of a regenerative agriculture or farming? What are the paths towards reformulating cattle raising, responsible for almost half of the emissions by cattle breeding, the cattle breeding sector? Many things go beyond the dichotomy of family farming producing food, major agriculture producers for export. That's over now. We now have to look at how the whole set of the agri-food system is reacting in terms of biodiversity solution, and that is what Think Food and Climate is about. That is what
Muito
they are
obrigada,
working
Ricardo. Sua
with and
fala
about. Thank
sempre
you,
tão
Ricardo.
instigante, né?
Such an
Obrigada por trazer
instigating
esses dados, esse
presentation as
alerta,
usual.
que
Thank you for
atualmente está
that
tão
data
claro,
and
inclusive a
this
partir do
warning,
Fórum
which is
Econômico
so
Mundial acerca dos
clear based
ultraprocessados, e
on
por
the
ainda
World Economic
terminar
Forum,
a sua fala dando
talking
esse
about
spoiler sobre as
ultra-processed food.
pesquisas
And
e
now you
o foco
providing
de
this
pesquisa
spoiler
da
about the
iniciativa Think Food and
research
Climate.
focus of
Bom,
the
então
Think
agora
Food and
vamos às
Climate
perguntas do
Initiative.
nosso público,
So
que
let's
foram
move on
sendo
to our
feitas no
Q&A
chat, né,
session,
durante
some of them in the
as
chat
falas dos
box,
nossos panelistas, e fiquem à
included
vontade
during
para
our
incluir as
panelists'
últimas perguntas, se
presentations.
assim
Feel free to
sentir.
include the last few
Houve uma
questions
pergunta sobre
as
onde é possível
they
encontrar os documentos que estão
come
sendo
up.
mencionados
A
aqui.
question was
Eu
asked about
reforço o
where to
convite
find the
já feito pela
documents
Isabel para
mentioned
que
here. I
visitem o
reinforce
site da
Isabel's
Cátedra José de Castro, que
invitation
inclusive
to
acabou de ser reformulado,
go and
além do
visit
site do
the
Imaflora, do
website,
Cebrap
as well as
Sustentabilidade.
Imaflora,
Muitos
Cebrap
desses materiais
Sustainability,
podem ser encontrados
Sustentabilidade.
lá.
All these documents
Uma
can be found
pergunta
in
que
these sites.
apareceu também,
One
a partir
question
da
that
Cláudia
came up
Silva,
here,
como
based
podemos fazer
on
para que o
what Claudia
debate
Silva
saia do
said,
nível
coming from Claudia Silva,
acadêmico e
is
passe
how
para um
do these
nível
debates
mais
come out
prático,
of
né?
academia and become more
Entendendo que
practical?
estamos num tempo histórico em que
Understanding
a
that we are at a
polarização é tão
historical moment
marcante,
where
como é que é
polarization is
possível
so
combater a
blatant, how
dicotomia
can we
e ter um
fight the
momento de
dichotomy
convergência, né,
and
que foi
promote
tão
this
destacada
convergence,
por todos
which
os
has been
panelistas,
highlighted by all
mais
speakers,
marcadamente pelo Patrick,
and
pelo
especially
Arilson,
by Arilson,
enfim, fica
Patrick?
aberto para que vocês possam
So
responder essa
open for
primeira
you to
pergunta, que
answer
talvez
this
seja
first question,
uma de
which will
grande
perhaps
dificuldade, talvez
be
seja a pergunta de milhões,
difficult, very
mas
difficult.
deixo aberto
It's
para
a
vocês
question
responderem
asked by
essa primeira
millions,
pergunta, depois tem as
4
outras
millions.
um pouco mais
I'll give
focadas
you
em
the
temas,
first question. The
específicos.
other questions are most focused on specific
Posso pegar
themes.
essa, não?
Yeah, I can take this one on, can I?
Claro que sim, Marcelo.
Sure.
A linguagem científica não é a linguagem da base da
Scientific
produção
language
de
is
alimentos
not
em qualquer país
the
do mundo,
food
tá?
production-based language anywhere in the
E
world.
quanto mais polarizado for esse
And the
país,
more
pior.
polarized the country is,
Cabe a
the
nós
worse
a
it is.
criação de uma
It is
metalinguagem
up
para
to us to
acessar esse
create
público.
a meta
Eu vou dar
language
um
to
exemplo
reach
para
this
vocês. Se você chegar no
audience, this
corredor da
public.
soja do
An
milho nos Estados
example,
Unidos,
when you
de
go
Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska,
to
você
Iowa,
começa uma
Illinois,
conversa
Nebraska,
falando sobre
and you go
mudança
to a
climática,
supermarket, right?
você
And you talk about climate change,
termina a conversa imediatamente.
you end the
Só
conversation
que quando você
immediately.
anda por lá, você está
But
andando
when
sobre
you
um
are
mar
in these
com torres
areas,
eólicas,
you are in a
edifícios
sea
solares
of
e
wind towers,
projetos de CCS,
solar panels,
de armazenamento de carbono, de estações de biometano,
carbon
de transformações
storage,
regenerativas na
biomethane
parte
stations,
produtiva.
regenerative
Ponto
stations
2.
with regard to
Esses estados são
production.
governados por republicanos.
Also, these
que
are
acham que
Republican
qualquer
states
coisa
who
relacionada
think
ao
that
climático é
anything
coisa
to
de
do with
esquerda,
climate
é
change is
coisa
a
do
lefty
democrata.
thing. It's a
Mas quando a
Democrat
gente olha
thing.
no
But when
RRA,
we
o
look at
Inflation
the
Reduction Act, aquele pacote de
RRIA,
subsídios
the
monstruosos
package of
para combate à
enormous
mudança climática do
subsidies
governo
to
americano, os
fight
estados que mais
climate change by the
utilizaram esse
American government,
financiamento
the
foram os
states
estados
that use this
republicanos.
this
O que
funding
diz o
more
seguinte,
were the Republican
o que
states,
cabe aqui
which
é a
says that what
metalinguagem utilizada. É a
matters here
nova
is the
linguagem
meta
que nós temos
language
que fazer
used.
para conversar
We have to
com esse
invent or
público.
bring up a new
Uma
language to
linguagem
talk
que
to this
fure essa
public.
polarização
We have to
barata, essa
go
coisa
through this
absurda
cheap
política partidária que
polarization,
existe,
this
porque, na
absurd
verdade, a
party politic
inteligência na
discourse,
inteligência estratégica
because within
está a
strategic
transformações do
intelligence,
sistema.
therein lies the
Então, não é
system's
apontando o dedo
transformation.
e
So it's not
trazendo
pointing fingers
estruturas
and bringing in
catastróficas que a gente
catastrophic
muda de
structures, but
posição
we
cognitiva.
change the
A gente tem que
cognitive
lembrar que a transformação é
availability
cognitiva, e para
or
a transformação
disposition.
cognitiva é
In terms of
necessário uma metalinguagem.
cognitive
As
transformation,
coisas
you need
estão acontecendo
meta
sem
language. Things
necessariamente
are
você
happening.
colocar
You
que é
have
o
to
seu pensamento ou a
necessarily
sua linguagem
say
que tem que se
what
encaixar.
is
Então, da
you
mesma forma que
think,
o setor
and
produtivo
it has to
precisa
fit
evoluir
in.
muito,
The
o
production
setor
sector needs to
ambientalista também
evolve
precisa
a lot.
evoluir no que diz
Environmental
respeito
sector
à
as
estrutura de
well, with regard to
comunicação,
their
de
communication
parcerias
structure,
e de
partnership
estruturação de
structure,
linguagem
and structure
adequada
of
para a
adequate
transformação dos tipos de
language
produção. Obrigado.
to transform the types of production. Thank you.
Isabel?
Não, ótimo.
Isabel,
Eu queria também adicionar alguns elementos
I'd
para
like to add
essa
a few
resposta.
elements here to that
Eu acho que é
answer.
precisamente
I
o que a gente
think
com essa iniciativa quer
what
fazer.
we
É
want
a
to do through this
tradução
initiative,
do que a
the
ciência,
translation of
as
what
pesquisas
science,
mostram,
research,
revelam, para os
show and
passos
reveal
práticos, para as mudanças,
towards the
seja
practical
nesse
steps
sentido que o
and
Marcelo
towards
está
changes,
falando, né, a mudança
be
do
whether in the way Marcelo
comportamento
mentioned,
do
in other words,
produtor, da
producers'
produtora, mas
behaviors,
também
and
nas
also
mudanças que a gente precisa
in terms of the
gerar
changes we must
nos
create
nos
within
nossos decisores públicos, os
our
agentes de decisão,
public
que
decision
é a gente ter
makers,
melhores políticas
which
públicas.
means we
Eu vou dar
need
um
better
exemplo que vai
public
do
policies.
estudo
I'll
para o
give you an
prático.
example
O
from
Imaflora tem trabalhado
study
já
to
há algum
practical.
tempo
Imaflora, for a while now, has been
estudando a
working,
nossa principal linha
has
de
been
crédito
studying our
que
main line
financia
of
a
credit,
agricultura
which
e pecuária
finances
no Brasil, que
cattle
é o
raising
Plano
and
Safra.
agriculture in
Né? Nós
Brazil, which
temos
is the
o Plano
Safra
Safra e
plan.
o Plano
We
Safra
have
da
the
agricultura
Safra
familiar
plan
também. Então,
and we
são
have family farming
dois
Safra
instrumentos, cada
plan.
com seu
Two
volume, montante
instruments,
de
each one
recursos.
with their own
O
amount
Plano
of resources.
Safra, ele
The
tem
Safra plan, Plano
algumas
Safra, has
linhas
some, sorry, she's
que
breaking
são
up,
feitas para financiar modelos
has
sustentáveis de
some
produção,
instances
algumas,
which
mas
are
tem algumas outras linhas
to finance
que
production, but
elas financiam
has other
modelos que ainda
lines
são
which
insustentáveis. Então, e a gente
funds
tem pouca
models which
informação
are
sobre
still
isso. Então, o papel
unsustainable. And we
do
don't have much information on
pesquisador da
that.
ciência, das
So the
organizações
researchers and
governamentais, como o
science
Imaflora, que
role
trabalham com
in
técnica e ciência e política
NGOs that
pública,
work
é
with
a gente tentar entender por que
techniques,
esse
science, and
montante de
public
recursos, por
policies.
exemplo, do Plano
Their
Safra,
role is to understand
ainda não
why so much
financia
resources, so many
prioritariamente o que é
resources from the
sustentável.
plan, the Safra
A
plan,
gente já tem
does not
algumas respostas.
finance
A partir dessas
mainly what is
respostas, a
sustainable. We
gente
do have
tem
some
que
answers.
mudar
Based on
a
these answers,
política pública,
we have
os
to change
incentivos.
public
Então, a gente vai para o
policies,
prático.
incentives,
Por
so then we
exemplo,
move on to the
na região
practical
norte do
side.
país,
For example, in
o
the
crédito
northern region
público
of
de
Brazil,
custeio
public
financia
credits,
principalmente a
financing
compra de
credits,
bovinos,
are used mainly
cabeças
to
de gado.
buy
O
cattle.
que adianta a gente continuar
So
financiando
what's the
só a
use of
compra de
continuing
bovinos
to
se
fund
esse
just cattle purchasing
criador de
If the cattle farmer has pasture which is not good, managed with techniques that can be described by Embrapa for good pasture management. What seems obvious is not necessarily obvious. We need to reveal this data, the real function of the practices in order to change them. So science, research, and practices, when we're talking about transformation, public policy improvement, of reconsidering models and how they are financed, is to talk about science that is totally practice-oriented.
Patrick, por favor.
Nadine, eu não sei
Patrick,
se eu continuo ou se você
please.
quer passar para outra pergunta.
Do
mas
I continue or do you want to move on to another
Se
question?
quiser contribuir, por favor.
Yes,
Tá
if you
bom.
want to pitch in, please do.
Well, eu vou começar pelo
I will
fato de
start
dizer
off
que
by
tem
saying that
paradoxo
there is a
incrível, que
paradox, an
a
amazing
polarização,
paradox,
em vez de contribuir
that
à transformação,
polarization, instead of
muitas
contributing
vezes
to
leva à
transformation,
procrastinação.
frequently leads to
Devido
procrastination
o relacionamento de forças, é
due to
a
the
melhor maneira
relationship of forces.
de não mudar
The
nada
best way of not
é
changing
só de
anything
aceitar a polarização.
is to just accept
Eh,
polarization.
E no caso que não seja o
In
caso,
the case,
aí leva a uma
it is already the
revolução
case.
que a
In
gente
our
nunca
case, it
sabe onde
leads
que
to
ela
a
vai
deep
terminar.
revolution which we don't know
Ou
where,
seja, entre esses
what
dois
will
caminhos,
conclude in. So between these
tem
two
aquele
paths, there is the one
de construir essa
which
inteligência da
is geared
transformação
towards building
para
transformation
quebrar
intelligences
a
in order
polarização.
to break
E a
with
polarização não é
polarization.
fácil de
And
quebrar.
polarization
Claro
is
que é
not
uma
easy
questão de
to
sintaxe, de
break
vocabulário
down.
e de
Of course, syntax,
fórmula.
vocabulary, and
Como
formulas,
bem falou,
and all
falaram
that, right?
Marcelo
As
e Isabel,
Marcelo and
mas também
Isabel
uma
mentioned
questão de
so well.
posicionamentos, muitas
It's all
vezes
about
político,
political
no
position
sentido
frequently
que
with
quando
regard to
há
the
essa
fact that
polarização,
when there is this
e foi muito bem
polarization,
dito pelo fato de
very well
apontar do dedo, para pegar essas
said,
palavras,
quote, pointing
uma
fingers
das
before by one of the
partidos
presenters,
critica a outra
when one
sem
party
nem saber
criticizes
porque
the
ela
other,
não
not even
concorda,
knowing
mas tem que
why
criticar.
they don't agree,
Tem
but
que
they
se
have to
opor,
disagree.
tem que
They have to be
apontar do
the
dedo.
other side. They have to
Tem
point
que uma
fingers.
estratégia de
It's a
deslegitimização,
it's a
como eu falei
delegitimization
anteriormente,
strategy, as I
e
said
que
during my
para
speech.
passar
My
para
speech.
outra
And in order to move on
nível,
to
para outra
another level,
para uma estratégia de construção coletiva,
a
o
collective
primeiro
construction
passo
strategy,
depende
the first step
entender por que a gente
depends
não
on
concorda.
understanding why we
O
do not
acordo
agree.
sobre desacordo é passo
The
fundamental
disagreement
que requer
agreement is essential. The
arranjo
agreement on
institucional que
disagreement
permite a
demands
mediação, que permite o
institutional
respeito
arrangements
de
that
para o
allows
outro,
for
que
mediation,
permite
mutual
entender quais são as
respect, and
estratégias
allows for
e os posicionamentos que são
understanding
necessariamente
strategies
tentar
and positions
deslegitimizar.
that
E
are,
esse é passo essencial
if they are
para
delegitimized,
depois,
why? That is
através
an
de
essential step
processo de
so that later
co-construção,
on,
passar
through
para
construction,
acordo sobre o
move on
desacordo,
to an agreement on
do
disagreement,
acordo sobre o desacordo para
the agreement on
desacordo
disagreement,
sobre o
moving
acordo,
towards
você
a
tenta,
disagreement on an
começa a
agreement,
estabelecer
you
uma
start
posição, uma
start
solução
to establish
coletiva, mas
a collective
ainda não
solution,
concordo,
but you
e
still don't
finalmente,
agree,
através de
and then
esforço de
finally,
negociação,
through a
você
negotiation
passar para,
effort,
às vezes, e quando é
you
possível,
move
essa
on
convergência
some
para
when possible
acordo
to
sobre
this
o acordo. Ou
convergence
seja,
and
do
move on
desacordo para
then
o
to an
desacordo,
agreement on
para o
agreement.
acordo
So
sobre o
agreement on
desacordo através da
disagreement
mediação,
and
para o
disagreement on
desacordo
agreement
sobre acordo
to
através do
disagreement on
co-design,
agreement through
para acordo sobre
co-design
acordo
and
através
agreement
de
on agreement
negociação, é
through
passo que necessita
another
arranjo
process.
institucional
This needs
que
an
está
institutional
sendo propício
arrangement which
para
is
construir futuro
proper
melhor. E
in
por isso
order
que
to build a better
essa iniciativa me
future.
parece
That's why this
fantástico
initiative seems
no,
great to me
na capacidade dela
in
de
terms of
construir as
its
condições
ability
para
to
diálogo
build
dessa natureza.
conditions for such a dialogue.
Muito obrigada pelas respostas tão concretas, né,
Thank you
sobre
for
um
your
tema que
answers.
costuma ficar muito mais no campo das ideias e muitas vezes
It's
sem foco.
good because we're
A
more
gente
on
tem
the
também
field of
a
ideas,
pergunta de Frank Neller,
not only on the
que
fields of
existe
ideas. We
no
also have the
agro,
question
a mitigação vai vir pela
in
oferta ou
agro,
pela
the
demanda,
mitigation
né?
comes
O
in
recurso
offer
tem que estar
or
ao mesmo
demand,
tempo gerador e
because
produtivo
agro is at the
e
same
mágico.
time.
E a pergunta é se existe espaço
If
para uma
there's any
transferência de
question
recursos de
to
atividades
transfer
agroprodutivas
resources
para negativas via
from
impostos de
positive to
carbono,
negative
por exemplo.
through
E o Fábio Ramos
carbon
colocou que a
taxes, for
produção
instance.
orgânica
And
aumenta
also,
na
if
Europa
the
e no
organic
Middle East,
production is
e
increasing
o
in
que
Africa
falta
and
para
in
o
the United
Brasil
States
agora
and
nas
Asia,
políticas públicas para
what's
suportar esse setor
lacking for
e
Brazil
aumentar a
to
produção orgânica também, né?
invest
De forma a ser uma
these
alternativa a
things
esses
as an
biociácicos, como
alternatives,
foi falado.
as it has been said.
Posso, então. Em primeiro lugar,
Well,
obrigado pela pergunta,
I can
Fábio.
get this one. Thank you for the question.
Em primeiro lugar,
First of all,
quero constatar que no Brasil a
I'd
produção
like to
orgânica está
highlight
aumentando,
that the production is increasing, and two,
uma boa parte,
a
tanto
good
do Big Food
part
como
of the
das
big
fazendas
food and
localizadas
of
em
the
regiões como Cerrado,
farms
grandes fazendas,
in places such as Cerrado, of the
e eu
big
acho que
farms.
isso que eu vou dizer é um dos
I think that
drivers,
one,
determinantes
what I'm going to say is one of the drivers of behavior
esses
changes.
setores estão
These
evidentemente
sectors
sentindo os
are
impactos das
clearly
mudanças
feeling the
climáticas. O
impacts
raciocínio
of
segundo o qual a crise
environmental
climática
changes.
é
The
sensível para
idea is
os
that
cientistas,
climatic changes are sensible to scientists and social movements, but the farmers are not concerned with that. About that, we can. It's an issue of facts. Soils are poorer, and this impacts the productivity of several farms, and they are looking for alternatives, whatever name it's given to the problems that are impacting them. So our goals is to study the change trajectories that are being used in agricultural and livestock production to face the biodiversity and sustainability issues. In Brazil, this is being developed a lot slower than it could, and I think that there's no way to avoid a theme that is quite polemic. But the fact that our agrarian structures really relies on the monotony of production, the fact that we have one product occupying a huge space, this occupation goes through a set of infrastructures and opportunities, market opportunities, that is not untangled from night to day. So it's not an issue of making, looking at this sector as the bad guys, but thinking that the agricultural livestock products is one of the few ones that makes this transition a lot harder than a country in which you'd have more diversification. What will be the pathways of this transformation? We'll have bioinputs with the enriching soils, although the exterior passage is monotonous. Will it be through productive diversification? This is what we need to study, but we need to acknowledge that the dependence of a few products, that this has been working so far as a problem for this ecological transformation of the agro-food system. I want to remember something that is important. In the federal government ecological transformation plan, this transformation of the agri-food system was placed afterwards. Before we had only bioeconomy. Now we have bioeconomy and agri-food systems. We need to be able to face and discuss around these hardships. And I believe that this dialogue is happening. It's fertile, and it's a lot higher in the agri-livestock business than in the ultra-processed
Obrigada,
industrial
Marcelo.
sector. Thank you, Ricardo. Marcelo,
Me
very
preocupo
quickly.
quando a gente tenta procurar alguma solução
I'm really concerned when we try to look, when we try, when we're trying to find a solution. And usually these transformations are slow because the governments are not able to do this without creating inflation. And then we have the taxes. So the sector is growing, this discussion is growing, and it's evolving a lot in Brazil more than in other countries. So it's we need to understand that this transformation that Ricardo was talking about, it's going to be really long because we have 8 products that represent the most amount of products, but it's in Brazil, 8 in China, in US, in every place. So there's a mindset shift in terms of consumption. So in terms of organic production, Brazil is not growing so big because we don't have the winter. So we have a lot of diseases and plagues of tropical climate. So doing organic production in tropical climate demands a bio-input production. Brazil has been improving in this, but it doesn't cover all the necessities. So we still have a certain limitation. I've been working in the organic sector for 24 years, and throughout these 24 years, we had to change 4 times the place of our production. We had to start from scratch and apply a poison for the doesn't not to lose the whole crop, and we had to change to an area to begin a different organic planting, and we've had to do this 4 times during 24 years. It generates a lot of costs. It's very complicated, so a lot of things has to be taken into account when we are producing organic
Obrigada, Marcelo.
produce.
Arilson?
Thank you, Marcelo.
Eu
Marius,
também queria
Adilson.
rapidamente retomar algo da pergunta anterior
I
e
wanted
lembrar
to
os
answer the
temas que os
previous
colegas estão
question and
tratando
also
agora.
address
Então,
the
primeiro, eu
issues
não
that are
estou
being talked
tão
about now.
certo a respeito da
I'm
afirmação de que
not so
esse debate está
certain
restrito
about
ao
that
campo acadêmico.
this
Talvez
debate
no passado
is
sim, ao
within the
campo
academia.
acadêmico e ambientalista.
I think
Mas acho
that
que a
in the
grande novidade
past
dos
it
anos
was
mais
present, but
recentes é
in
que
the
esse
most
debate agora
recent
não está
years,
mais
this
confinado à
debate is not
comunidade
more confined
ambientalista
actually
ou à comunidade
in the
científica que lida com temas
academia
ambientais.
and
Esse debate que
environmental
nós estamos fazendo aqui agora
areas.
está
That
presente
this
no meio
debate
empresarial,
is
está presente
present
na
in
juventude,
the
nas
companies,
instituições sociais,
with the
e essa
youth,
é a
with
grande
the social
oportunidade,
movements,
eu acho,
and
do
this
nosso
is the
tempo,
great
né?
opportunity of our
Aproveitar que
times,
essa questão hoje,
is to
ela
be
é
able to
compartilhada com todos.
use
Agora,
the
ela é
opportunity that
compartilhada
this
sob
is
uma
shared
polifonia,
among all,
né? Uma
but shared
multiplicidade de
throughout
vozes,
a
de léxico, de
multiplicity of
vocabulário,
voices
etc.,
and
que complica muito
vocabularies that
a
really
busca
make it
por convergência.
complicated,
Então, eu não
the
vou
search for
repetir aqui o
convergence.
que
So
outros
I'm not
colegas
going
já disseram,
to
o Marcelo, a
repeat what
Patrícia, como
Marcelo, Patrick
buscar esses acordos,
has said on
especificamente,
how to
mas
look
acho que
for
nós
these
temos agora nos
agreements,
anos recentes
but I
condições
believe that in
novas,
the recent years
comparativamente
we've
a
had a
10 anos
new
atrás. Isso precisa ser
situation
reconhecido,
when
né?
compared
Porque
to 10
senão a
years
gente
ago.
pode partir de pressuposto errado, né? Quer dizer
So
que
it's
só nós
important to
estamos
highlight
preocupados com a
this
questão
because
ambiental
we
e
might
os
understand
setores
that
não
we're
estão.
the only
Não, eu
ones
acho que isso
concerned with
deveria
the
muito estar sendo
environmental
presente
issues.
numa
No, I
diversidade
think this is
enorme de
quite
atores
present
e não é
with a great
monopólio
diversity of players,
de parte do campo
and it's not a
científico
monopoly of
ou
part of
do
a
movimento
scientific
ambientalista.
group of the
Com relação
environmentalist
ao outro tema que foi
movement.
levantado, eu
Concerning
fico
about the
convencendo
other
que
topic,
tem 2 ou 3 palavras-chave que podem
I think
ajudar
there are
nessa
2 or
nossa
3
convergência. A
keywords that
primeira
can help
delas
us
é
in this
algo que
convergence.
justamente os colegas,
The first one
do
is
lado
something
contrário
that
de Bergelier,
our colleagues from Montpellier, where Patrick has been working with, is the idea of coexistence. For a long time, we've always thought about the food systems. Oh, this is the right model, this is the wrong model, and so on. One thing that has been imposing to us is to think about a coexistence of different models. We're going to have the organic agriculture, we're going to have the monoculture agriculture, the family agriculture. In each one of these segments, we have a huge diversity on ways to produce. So we have to diminish the space of the antagonism that there is today. Today, there's a polarity, there is an antagonism, and we need to make players to get closer. And based on certain criteria on the sustainability debate. And this can be translated in different words, such as Marcelo said. Research made a few years ago really impressed me how the farmers from the Mato Piba really acted in a different way. Oh, this is not only, oh, this is the cost. If we can discuss on how this cost is covered, I can't stop deforesting and so on. So if we are more pragmatic and we acknowledge diversity, we can use this. And the other thing is coordination. We didn't do the transition to the productivist on the green revolution with a silver bullet. We need to coordinate state and private sectors. We need to coordinate research, technology, funding, and markets. I'm not saying that we need to have a ready-made product or idea. If we need to work with different scientific communities, business people, and government to bring together and be more harmonized. Otherwise, we'll have a sort of schizophrenic discussions and we won't be able to advance in transition. Thank you, Arilson. Patrick, I invite you to do the considerations about this question and the final remarks and the remaining panelists to do their final remarks.
Muito obrigado, Nadine. Vou tentar ficar muito rápido.
Thank you. I'll
Continuando com o
try
que
to
a
speak
Wilson
briefly.
agora acabou de falar,
Carrying on with what
tenho que
Arilson was
pensar
speaking,
também,
we have
e
to
aí a
think
ciência pode ser útil,
about
não
certain
sou-
things, and
não
science
sou
can be useful
observador,
on
tem
that,
que pensar como acompanhar
on
politicamente
how to
essa
follow up
transição através
politically
de
this
não só
transition,
de trajetórias
not
diferenciadas
only
para
on
os
different
diferentes modelos, mas
trajectories
também
for
da
different models,
coexistência. E
but
se eu
in terms of
pego
coexistence.
dado,
And
um,
if
é,
when we watch a certain
me
data,
ajuda a pensar essa
that
convergência,
helps us to
é o
think about this
fato de cada
convergence,
de todos agora
is the fact
reconhecer
that
a
everyone
grande
now
diferença
is
entre
acknowledging
o custo
the
da
huge
alimentação
difference
e o
of the
preço da
cost
alimentação.
of food
Fica
and
mais
the
ou
price
menos
of food.
o custo 3 vezes mais do
It's
que o
more or
preço.
less cost is 3
Uma
times
vez que
bigger
a gente
than the price.
considera as externalidades em termos
Once we
de
consider
saúde e em termos
externalities
de
in
meio
terms of
ambiente.
health
E esse é
and environment.
consenso através
And
disso.
this is
Não quer
consensus.
dizer que de dia para outro a gente teria que
It
pagar
doesn't
3
mean that
vezes mais
from one day to the other we need to pay 3 times
bens
more.
alimentares. Não seria possível
That won't be
socialmente e
possible,
politicamente, mas aí se
social
a
and
gente
politically.
olha para os
But if we
subsídios
look
da política
at the
pública para a
subsidies of the
agricultura,
public policies
dá
for
para ver
agriculture,
com dados recentes que dos
we can see
540 bilhões
that
de
from the
dólares, que são
$540
total
billion,
investimentos
which is the
dos
total
subsídios públicos do mundo,
of public subsidies in the world,
favorece
87%
sistemas que não são
favor
sustentáveis.
systems that are not
Esses,
sustainable. these $540 billion correspond only to 1/10 of the total production, but this 10th and the ability of redirect these subsides so that the cost and the price will be more convergent. This is hugely important. So science has an important role to diminish this gap between cost and price, and we have to rethink about public policies. And we need to include not only subsidies, but also the rules of international trade.
Muito
Ou
obrigada,
seja,
Patrick.
queria insistir.
Então, agora
Thank you,
convido.
Patrick. And I'd like to insist
Uma palavra,
on that.
queria insistir sobre essa
Just
maneira
a word.
de repensar o relacionamento entre
This
ciência
idea of
e política,
rethinking relationship
tomando em conta
between science and politics,
usando e abusando
taking
talvez dessas
into
convergências
account
que nasce agora nesse
these convergences
panorama novo.
that we're talking
Muito
within this
obrigada, Patrick.
overview.
Agora convido as últimas palavras, Isabel.
Thank you, Patrick. Isabel, for your
Obrigada,
final
Nadine.
remarks.
Bom, queria
Thank
agradecer
you,
ao
Nadine.
Ricardo, ao Arilson,
I'd like to
ao
thank
Marcelo, ao
Ricardo,
Patrick,
Arilson,
né,
Marcelo,
por
and
estar
Patrick
conosco aqui hoje.
for being here with us
E queria
today.
reforçar que
And
essa
I'd
nossa
like to highlight
iniciativa
that this
é para a
initiative
gente encontrar pontos comuns, uma agenda
is
comum.
for us to
Eu
find
acho
a
que essa
common
agenda comum,
agenda. And I think that this
ela
common
vai
agenda
passar por a gente acordar quais são as
will
prioridades,
passes
né?
through
E para a gente ir bastante
our
mesmo prático
awakening,
e conseguir enxergar. O Marcelo
because
fez
to
logo
be
no
able
começo
to
na
be
fala dele a pergunta, bom,
practical,
então,
it's quite important. And
quando, né?
Marcelo was
Porque
talking
muitas coisas já
about
estão
his
aí,
first
mas quando que a
talk.
gente vai
When
realmente ver
are
a
we
transformação?
really
E
beginning
esse
to see
quando
this
é para
transformation?
ontem,
And this
né?
when
Então a urgência está
is
mais que
actually
colocada. Mas a
this
gente
was supposed
encontrar
to be
pontos
yesterday. So
comuns na
if
agenda,
we find
e
common
independente das abordagens
themes on
diferentes
the
que as organizações
agendas,
defendem, a gente
although
conseguir
we
focar
have
e
different
priorizar.
approach,
Isso vai desde priorização
if we can
geográfica, até a
focus
priorização
on
mesmo
the
dos instrumentos que
implementation
estão mais
in
prontos
terms
para
of
dar
the
conta
instruments
de fazer a
that
transformação,
are
fazer a mudança de
ready
comportamento, como o Marcelo falou.
to help
Eu acho que é
this
aí que a gente
behavior
consegue
shift.
ganhar e avançar
That's
alguma
where
coisa.
we are
Eu só
able
queria dizer
to
rapidamente que esse evento
put
ele vai
this
ser
into action.
traduzido e legendado. A gente
This
tem problema
event
na tradução.
will be
Para que
translated
também
and
outros
subtitled
colegas de
so
outros
that
países, outras
other
organizações depois
colleagues from
possam
other countries and other
assistir. A gente vai
organizations can
divulgar.
watch.
E a gente vai ter em
So we're going to
breve uma
publicize this.
página web da
And soon
iniciativa
we'll have a
que vai ter ali um
website of the
repositório
initiative.
de tudo que a
Well,
gente
we'll have
andar,
this
de tudo que
huge
acontecer,
archive
dos
of everything
eventos
that
e dos
happens,
anúncios de
all the
próximas
events
ações
of
que a gente
next
tiver, tá?
actions
Então
that we'll have.
aguardem que a
So
gente está providenciando tudo
wait,
isso. Muito
and
obrigada.
we'll provide this.
Muito obrigada, Isabel. Arilson, últimas considerações?
Thank
Não,
you,
eu também
Isabel.
queria
Arilson,
terminar
final
agradecendo, né,
considerations.
primeiro a você, né,
I'd
também
like to
pela,
start
pela
off by
condução
thanking you,
do nosso
Nadine,
debate, né, pela
for
coordenação aí
mediating
do
our
evento,
debate and
aos meus
coordinating the
colegas
event.
aqui que compartilharam
My
também esse
colleagues
tempo
here
comigo, foi
who
um
shared
privilégio
this
ter quem
moment with me.
acompanhou a
It
gente
has been a
aqui até
privilege.
agora.
And for those who have
Para
followed
além
us here
desse agradecimento final,
thus
eu
far,
queria dizer que
as well
eu
as
não estou
finally
exatamente
offering my
pessimista,
word of thanks,
apesar da
I'd like to
dramaticidade do
say
momento
that
que a gente vive,
in
né?
spite of
Nós, no Brasil,
the
nos últimos anos, a gente já teve também pouco
drama
com a
we're
moral baixa,
going
né,
through,
digamos assim,
we've
em
been with
relação
low morale
à nossa
recently,
capacidade de
right?
construir
I'm not
coisas,
a pessimist,
mas
okay? I'd
eu
like to say
lembraria
that.
aqui que ao longo dos últimos 100
I'd
anos
like
o
to
Brasil
remind you
teve
that
pelo menos
over the
3
last
grandes
100
revoluções,
years,
né?
Brazil has
A
gone through
gente,
three major
de
transitions.
1930 a
From
1980, o
1930 to
país
1980,
deixou de ser
the
país
country
agrário, passou a
was
ser
no longer an
país
agrarian country,
industrializado,
moved from an
parcialmente, mas um país
agrarian to
industrializado,
partially
urbanizado.
industrialized and
Dos anos
urbanized
60 até
country.
os anos 80,
In
o
the
Brasil saiu da
1960s to
condição,
the
né, de um país
1980s,
deficitário na produção
Brazil
de
came
alimentos
out
para um dos
of
maiores
a
exportadores
food
mundiais,
production
e
deficit
dos anos
situation to one
80
of the
para a
largest food
industrialização, né, até a
production.
década
And from
passada,
the
nós
1980s to the
construímos
last
sistemas de
decade,
direitos, né,
we built
construímos
rights
Estado, né,
systems.
que reconhece,
We
né,
built
direitos para
a
boa parte da
state
população,
that
muito longe do ideal,
recognizes,
que é a cidade
acknowledges
melhor
rights for
do que muitos países
much of the
próximos a
population,
nós.
Far from ideal, but more than many countries close to us. And in the next 3 or 4 decades, we are going to create a new cycle in Brazil. And I think the debate on sustainability can be such an opportunity, but we have to seize this opportunity quickly. And the time is now to go into this initiative and create one more space to create this kind of future utopia. So let's build this together. Thank you.
Obrigada, Arilson, pela injeção de
Thank you,
otimismo.
Arilson, for
Marcelo,
the
suas considerações.
optimism
Foi
injection.
muito rápido, tá?
Now,
Só
Marcelo,
queria lembrar
well, very
que
briefly, I just
o
like to
futuro de
remind
qualquer
you
coisa,
that
qualquer lugar,
the
qualquer
future
país,
of
qualquer
anything,
qualquer
any
área,
country, any farm, any area
não está nos riscos que as mudanças
is
climáticas
not
nos
in
colocam hoje,
the risks that
mas
the
sim
climate
do que
changes
nós
pose
faremos a
today,
partir do
but what
conhecimento
we
devido.
will do
Então,
based
aqui
on
o
what we
nosso,
know
nosso ponto
and
inicial.
acquire in terms of
Esse é o
knowledge. That's
ponto
the
inicial
starting
de
point
como a gente se
about
transforma
how
enquanto sociedade em todas as
we
suas
transform as a
etapas
society
da cadeia.
at each
Eu adoro
stage.
sistemas alimentares, que é muito
I
mais
love food
amplo do que
systems.
cadeia alimentar, tá?
I don't like,
Então,
I like it more than
como
food
fazemos a
chain.
partir desse
So
ponto é que
what
nos
we do
guiará.
from now on,
É
that
guiará
will
o nosso futuro.
guide us
Obrigado, gratidão.
towards what the
E foi um
future will
prazer
be.
estar aqui hoje.
So thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a
Obrigada,
pleasure.
Marcelo, Patrick.
Thank you, Marcelo. Patrick?
Ó, eu sou uma frase só.
Just one
Fiquei muito
sentence.
feliz de
I'm very
estar
happy
convidado e fazer
to
parte
have
da
been
construção dessa
invited
utopia.
to build
Muito
this
obrigada.
utopia, to be
Prazer e a
part of
honra
it.
são nossos. Ricardo?
The honor and pleasure is ours. Thank you. Ricardo, a great joy. This conversation has been most interesting. It's already enough for those watching to feel what our initiative will be like. I think we have been able to move from commonplace and try within this short amount of time, try to bring up important issues, backdrop issues from the Montpellier effort that Patrick mentioned, very much geared towards the relationship between science and the practical side. This discussion will continue, of course, and I'd like to invite you all to an event that the Comida de Amanhã Cebrap Institute, José de Castro chair, everyone within the realm of G20, we are organizing this for the 12th of June with many guests. I won't use the time here to list them, but it will be a very interesting online event. Everyone's invited to participate. And what matters here, the major novelty we have today, in addition to those referred to by my predecessors here today, Marcel, I think this is important, the difference between agri-food systems and agri-food chains. When you talk about agri-food food system, you are talking about the relationship between food and the relationship, it moves beyond agri-food chains, and this involves a set of values. I think that what Marcelo showed us in his presentation with regard to Asia is the expression of a set of ethical and normative values which are more and more guiding the behavior of the players involved in the agri-food system. How will these values translate into objectives, strategies, tactics, work programs? Well, we'll see about that as time goes on. But what matters are those values, and these values seem to me, well, the climate crisis is making these values more and more reinforced and adopted as by a major set of players, with the exception of the fundamentalist fanatics, etc. But that's, another story. Thanks very much.
Ricardo. Infelizmente,
Thank you,
nós estamos chegando
Ricardo.
ao final do nosso
We are
webinar.
reaching the
A
end of our
expectativa é de que
webinar.
tenha feito fervilhar
Unfortunately,
ideias e
we hope it
impulsionar
has,
outros Caso
brought
você que
up
nos
some
assista,
ideas
que nos
bubbling.
assiste tenha colocado alguma pergunta que não
For
pôde
those
ser
who are
respondida
watching
no
us, if
chat
you
por
have
conta do
included
tempo,
a question
depois
because of
analisar no
time that
e-mail no
cannot be
chat, que é o
answered, we have left you an email,
imaflora@imaflora.org, para onde a pergunta pode ser encaminhada e
imaflora@imaflora.org,
vai ser
where you
respondida
can convey
posteriormente.
your
Eu
questions to
destaco
be
que para
dealt
esse
with later
evento que o
on.
Ricardo acabou de anunciar em
As
primeira mão,
Ricardo
para saber mais
said
detalhes,
firsthand, I'd
que
like to highlight the
tenham atenção
fact
à divulgação por
that
meio do site e de
um,
redes sociais
pay
das
attention
instituições
to
parceiras que estão
dissemination
aqui,
via the
mas
partner
também
institution
Comida da
sites and the
Manhã,
event
IDEC,
websites,
outras instituições,
Comida de
e
Amanhã,
não
other
percam.
institutions,
Agradeço muito a presença e a disponibilidade de todos
IDEC.
os
So thank
painelistas
you,
e
all the
também a
panelists,
presença e o
to all the
prestígio de
panelists
cada
for your
pessoa que esteve
availability
conosco nesta
and the
manhã. Uma ótima
attendance and
continuidade de dia
prestige
para
given
vocês e
by
até a
those
próxima.
here present. Have a great day and see you next
Tchau,
time.
gente. Um abraço. Super
Thank you,
obrigada.
everyone. Thanks very much.
Obrigado.
All the best. Take care.
Próximo